Hi, James. Thanks for joining us today.
Hello, Charlotte. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. How are you?
Good, thank you. Very well, yes.
Wonderful. So we've got some questions for you, and then we will move on to the questions that have been submitted from the students.
Lovely.
Great. So first of all, we would like to know about your experiences at school. And this is actually also a question from Leo at KSA. He would also like to know, when you talk about your experiences at school, about the GCSEs that you chose too.
At school, I was a pretty good student, I think. I can't say I liked school. I didn't like school because I found all the other kids intimidating, and I was scared all the time of going into school. I didn't get bullied, but I was definitely constantly worried about getting bullied, and the social aspect of school was really daunting for me. Did all right in classes, and mainly liked the creative classes. Loved art and drama and music and writing stories in English. Those were the things I looked forward to. And GCSEs, I did pretty well at GCSEs. I can't remember what grades I got, but they were mainly A's to C's, and I did quite well. I remember going in to pick up my GCSEs from school, and there was the Evening Telegraph was there, the Kettering Telegraph, and wanted photos of some of the students and asked us what GCSEs we got and what we wanted to do after school. And it was printed in the paper. There's a picture of me holding my results, and it said what my results were, and it said, "I want to be a rock star." And that was the quote that they used, because that's what I wanted to do at the time. I was really wanted to do creative things, and then I stayed on and did 1 year of A levels, AS levels, and then I decided I didn't want to do my A levels, so I left to be in a band with my friend, and I didn't go to uni or anything like that afterwards, and just that was it. That was my. I was quite happy, I think, to not have to go to school anymore. But it has been incredibly useful in hindsight.
So then, how did you go from wanting to be a rock star to wanting to become a comedian?
The rock star thing didn't fail, but I was in a band. I was drumming in bands for a few years after leaving school, and it got down to just me and one guy in a band together who was a guitarist, and then he quit when I was 22, and I'd already done stand-up just to try it and see if I could do it. I didn't want to do it as a job. I just wanted to see if I could do it as an experience, so I could always tell people that I tried stand-up. And when the band stopped, because I was a drummer, I couldn't really go solo, and I was tired of setting up drum kits all the time, and I was really tired of forming bands and having to get other people as enthusiastic as I was and trying to get them to do the work with me, because you have to be very hard working if you're going to go into the arts. So I just started doing stand-up because I had nothing else to do. Like I said, I didn't go to university. I didn't really have any qualifications to fall back on. So I started doing stand-up just as a way of filling the time so that I wasn't sitting at home doing nothing. And I didn't really want to do it as a job. I just really enjoyed the challenge of it. And the more that I enjoyed the challenge of it, the more I got better at it. And then probably about a year into doing it, and this is a year into probably doing 5 gigs a week around the country and going around and sleeping on people's sofas and getting off-peak train tickets all the time and eating very little. After a year of that, I was good enough at it that I enjoyed it and I wanted to do it as a job. So it took me until I was probably 24 to decide that I wanted to do it or try and do it as a job.
Thanks, James. Yeah, that's the question we've had from Jace, Caitlin and Charlie from KSA, who'd asked, why did you become a comedian? So a lot for the challenge. Were there any other reasons?
Just I liked being on stage. I liked being funny. It's this stuff that I was drawn to anyway in school. If there was a school performance on, I wanted to be on stage. I wanted to have the comedy part. I didn't ever want to do serious acting, so I always wanted to make it comedic. I loved watching comedians. I loved being in the audience at gigs and wanted to figure out how they did it and I'd seen some comics who were observational comedians, like Lee Evans, who probably would be like the modern day equivalents, people like Michael McIntyre. and I thought, oh, I couldn't do that. Observational material seemed really hard. And then I saw some weirder comedians who were doing more surreal stuff, and I was like, oh, I think I could, that's more me and that's more my sort of humor. And so that was when I started thinking about trying it out. And yeah, it was just, to begin with, it was just a challenge that was a fun challenge. And I think that that's important as well. It's not always about, this will be my job and I'll make money from it. I got into it, and like a lot of comedians who got into it at the same time as me, just because we liked comedy and we saw the act of doing it was enough. If you did it, then you could, I remember before I did my first gig, someone telling me that just by getting on stage or setting yourself apart from 99.9% of the population, most people wouldn't get on stage or even try this. And that was more important to me, just that I was doing it. If it never became my job, I still would have got so much out of it, because it would have done a lot for my confidence and just life experience as well. So that was the main drive to get on stage in the first place.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important message to the students about doing something that you love, even if it might not turn into a career, just still having things that you're passionate about and that you enjoy doing.
Yeah, so much of your life when you're a teenager is made to be about what you want to do with the rest of your life, and that's insane, because I don't know anyone who knew what they wanted to do with their life when they were a teenager. You should just do what you want to do right now. Do what your passions, where your passions are leading you and what you're enthusiastic about, because that's the things you're going to be best at. You're not going to be good at the stuff you're not enthusiastic about or don't care about. So you're just taking someone else's job that they could do probably better than that, because they'd be enthusiastic about it. Do the things you want to do and that you're keen on doing, and it might turn into your job. But if it doesn't, you've got this experience that you've lived, and this is going to enrich your life and inform what you do want to do as well. You only figure out what you want to do by doing other things and narrowing it down. So yeah, don't worry, this isn't, the workshop that we're doing isn't only people who want to be comedians as a living and you're going to be serious about it. It's about, it's about experience and confidence as well. I think that's a big thing with it. It helps with confidence.
Definitely, yeah, and confidence helps in all areas of life, and we'll talk about the workshops really soon, but we would love to know, what are some of the main skills that you need to be a stand-up comedian? And again, these are skills that will be transferable to all elements of life.
Well, I mean, I don't know how transferable they are, but the main skills really are writing, performance, and improvisation. And you can only have one of those skills and still make it as a stand-up comedian. You don't need all three. You can be a good writer, and that's enough, because your writing is good enough that that's what gets you by every gig. You can be a brilliant performer with bad material, but your performance is good enough that everyone really is drawn to it. Or you can be really good on the spot and just improvising, and it doesn't matter about how good you are writing in advance or performing, because how quickly you're coming up with stuff is exciting for people. In terms of skills that are transferable outside of that, I'd say patience is really key. It's going to take a long time, and it's not going to happen overnight. And so you've got to be patient with it. And I think that a lot of jobs, that's important. And just hard work. You've got to want to put the work in. That it doesn't happen quickly. And all the comedians I know who started at the same time as me, who are hard workers, all of them are doing it for a living now. And everyone who didn't work hard when we started out is not doing it at all anymore. And there were comedians who were funnier than us when we started out, who aren't doing it anymore because they didn't want to work at it. And the rest of us, we were going out doing gigs every night, working on our material, trying to get better, and it's now our job. And that's a great thing about stand-up as well, is that it's one of the few careers in the arts where if you do put the work in, it does become your job. I don't know anyone who put all the work in and didn't make it as a professional comedian on some level. That doesn't mean you're going to be on TV all the time, but doing gigs every night and earning a living from being a stand-up comedian will happen if you work hard enough at it.
Yeah, I think this is something you mentioned a few times now, that if you want to work in the arts, you do need to be prepared to work very hard.
Yeah, yeah, it's, you know, you're self-employed, you haven't got a boss looking over your shoulder telling you get back to work. You are just doing it by yourself. Especially at the beginning, it was just me booking myself gigs, getting on trains, going to, you know, Plymouth or whatever, doing 5 minutes, sleeping in a hotel, going somewhere else. You know, you're on stage for 5 or 10 minutes a night if you're lucky. If you go to London, you can squeeze in a few gigs in one night and be traveling around London. It was very exciting for me. I hadn't really been to outside of Kettering much, and so suddenly doing this and pushing myself at it again, success wasn't really the main thing in my head. It was like, not only am I getting to go on stage, and that's the part of the experience, I'm also getting to just travel around the UK, which I haven't really seen much of, and like go to London for the day and do loads of gigs in the evening. And even if it's going badly, well, I just, you know, just got on the tube, and that was exciting. So like, you know, I think my enthusiasm early on meant that I was able to work hard a lot easier because I wasn't getting discouraged by any of it. I was thinking, oh, this is great. You know, just the fact that I'm in Plymouth today is exciting. And then I went on stage and did, you know, 5 minutes to silence, and then went to a bad hotel, but like it was fine because it was an adventure. And as long as you kind of are going to put the work in, then it will happen. But you have to, it has to come from self-motivation. You have to be motivating yourself. No one's going to go, hey, you need to write that new routine, or you need to book some more gigs. You need to do that.
And to stay with your early experiences of comedy, I want you to think now to your first ever stand-up performance, like some of the students will be doing who do the workshops. How did you feel when you did your first stand-up performance?
Really nervous, really excited. I definitely spent the whole day pretending that I wasn't doing it, like in my head, telling myself that I didn't have anything on that night, which I don't know how healthy that is, but like that's how I coped with it because I didn't want to panic all day. I remember, again, like that thing before I went on stage, the guy saying most people wouldn't dare do this, and I felt quite proud of myself at that point, and that gave me a bit more courage to get on stage, thinking that just getting up there is enough. I remember the compere introducing me, saying my name and walking to the stage and feeling like I could feel my heart going in my chest. And I remember the door to the pub, it was in the Rising Sun pub, I don't know what it's called now, the Sun, in Kettering, it's just in the town centre, and the stage was next to the front door. And as I was walking to the stage, I kind of thought I could just walk out the front door and go home, and no one would know that it was meant to be me getting on stage apart from the compere. But I got on, and it was a really supportive audience, and I really loved being up there. It was so much fun. I didn't really feel nervous when I was on stage because of how much fun it was. And I remember coming off and my adrenaline just being really high and being really excited about, I'd just done this thing, and I could have stopped then and it would still be something that I'd be proud of to this day. The fact that I'd got on stage and done a gig, it was a really exciting experience. And yeah, a lot of nerves and then a lot of elation afterwards.
Thanks, James. And we'd now like to know what advice you have for young aspiring comedians.
Well, just like, yeah, more of what I was saying earlier, really, but like the main thing I'd say is write all the time, always be always writing new material, gig all the time, so be doing gigs constantly, and then thirdly, always evaluate and try and improve. So like look at the gig you've done and analyze what worked, what didn't work, why, and then change that for your next gig. And you might get it wrong. You might think, I did loads of stuff where I was like, okay, this routine went well, why did it go well? Oh, it's probably because of this thing, because I did this, so I'll do that again, and then I'll do it again, and it actually wouldn't have been that thing. I'd have to go back and go, okay, no, it wasn't that, what was it? So there's a lot of analysis, and you have to enjoy, you know, opening the bonnet and getting in the engine and figuring out how everything works. But yeah, basically constantly generating new material, constantly being on stage, and constantly analysing and changing your approach and honing it are the three main things, I think.
Wonderful. And before we move on to the student Q&A, we would like to know, what do you hope that students will take away from your comedy workshops? And if you could tell us a little bit more about them.
Yeah, just Again, just the experience of it, and a little bit more confidence, hopefully. Like, you know, I think that if you haven't got on stage before, especially on your own, like I'd been on stage before in like school plays and stuff like that, but I hadn't been on stage on my own before, and that was a completely different feeling. If you haven't done that before, I think just doing it once is a massive confidence booster, and it's really helpful and does help in other areas of life, whatever you end up doing, job-wise, career-wise, anything. It does help to have that bit of confidence of, well, I've done that before. And just like when originally, so when I first got into stand-up, I actually got into it before I started doing loads of gigs. There was this workshop in Kettering that was put on by the Volunteer Bureau, and this guy who had probably been an open mic comedian, so that's a very beginner comedian, he had asked to put it on. So he's like teaching us. He probably hadn't done many gigs himself, but and there was only 3 of us who attended the workshop, and each week all we did was perform 5 minutes of comedy to each other, and the other people would feed back as to what was good, what was bad, and that was it. And I actually found that incredibly helpful. We'd have to write 5 new minutes a week. We would all get good at being able to give positive feedback and articulate ourselves well to each other and be helpful to one another, not just criticizing each other for the sake of it or telling each other it was brilliant for the sake of it, actually helping each other improve. And that is what I want to do with the workshops, is like talking about comedy together, talking about what works and what doesn't work with each other's acts, and each doing 5 minutes to the rest of the group every week that we've worked on in between. And I think keeping it simple like that is the best way of doing it. Every person's going to have a different voice, and I think that's part of what people can get out of doing comedy as well, is that you get to know yourself a bit better. It kind of makes you look at yourself and go, how am I different to everyone else? And actually see that those differences are your biggest strengths and are your biggest positives. When it comes to getting on stage, you want to set yourself apart from anyone else who's on the lineup, any other comedian they've seen, and you are unique. You know, in everyone to a degree is different to everybody else. The comedy one person would do is unlike anything else someone else would do. There might be similarities, but you succeed off how different you are. So I think that's another little bonus that you can get from just the process of thinking about doing stand-up and performing it, is you get to appreciate yourself a little bit more, I think.
Thanks, James. Well, I'm really excited for the workshops, and I'm sure that the students listening will be. And students can find out more about the workshops from their teachers at school. So now we'll move on to the student Q&A. We'll start off with a few questions from Kettering Science Academy. We've had a student called Mark who would like to know, is it hard to make up jokes?
Very hard at the beginning. Yeah, at the beginning I really didn't know how to do it. So I tried everything. I was trying to learn how to write one-liner jokes, really short jokes, trying to write whole stories that were like, you know, that were funny. Songs early on, like just anything. I was trying absolutely everything out, and I really didn't know what would work and what wouldn't until I got on stage, and I learned gradually what would work, and what worked in the end was stuff that would suit who I was and suit coming from me. And once you crack that, it gets a lot easier, and you know what's funny in your voice and coming from me, and actually you learn to trust your own worldview and your own perspective a bit more, because that's what's funny about you, is the way you see the world. And then it's easier to write. Nowadays, it's a lot easier for me to sit down, write something that's funny. But when I started out, I would be on those trains a lot with my notebook out, just writing everything and looking at it and thinking, is that funny? I don't know. Like, I'm funny with my friends, but it was just going to be funny on stage. And there's just a lot of trial and error involved, but in a fun way. I think early on it's this really fun discovery of how can I make these jokes work, and now it's a lot more. I know myself more, and it's a lot easier.
Do you have a favourite one of your own jokes that you've made?
I don't know, like there was jokes that I was really proud, like real breakthrough ones that I'm quite sentimental about because they were big learning experiences. So like for ages, so probably the one that sticks out, I've told it on so many shows and stuff, but is I'd say I bought some ready to eat apricots the other day. They say you are what you eat, which is true, because as soon as I bought the ready to eat apricots, I was ready to eat apricots. And that's a great joke. But I'm very sentimental about that because I it took me ages to write it. I was still learning to write jokes, and I bought some ready to eat apricots and thought there was something funny in it. And I kept on saying to one of my mates on the train, "Are you ready to eat apricots?" "No, these are ready to eat apricots." And I thought maybe that's the whole joke. And I went on stage and did that, and it didn't really work. And it took me a long time to find that the key was you are what you eat, and that was the funny bit to it. So I just felt a huge sense of achievement that I'd finally got this joke, and it became one of my first short jokes that always worked. And that's a huge thing when you're starting out as a comedian, to have a banker that will always work no matter how hard the gig is. So that's kind of got a lot of sentimental value. Yeah.
We've had a great question from Oliver. It's linked to resilience. They would like to know, how do you deal with hecklers in the audience?
Yeah, not well sometimes. Like I am kind of renowned for not dealing with hecklers very well, and so I'm not going to pretend like I do it well, because I don't. The best way I would say, well, you have to deal with each heckler based on their own individual merit, who they are and what they're doing and how they're acting. Because like some people will heckle you, "You're rubbish, get off stage, hate this is unfunny," and they're being horrible. And you maybe do have to shut that person down in some way that's a bit, maybe it might be a bit more assertive. But you don't treat someone like that who, shouts, "I love this joke," or whatever. You go, "Shut up!" And then it's like, that's not, you're really misreading the situation in the room. So you have to deal with it the same way you deal with conversations in real life. When people talk to you, you respond to them based on how they're talking to you. And you really have to remember that it's not you versus the audience. They're not against you. Some of them are joining in because they're enjoying it and they like you and they like the routine. Some of them are even trying to be funny themselves and aren't doing anything malicious. And maybe when they shout the thing out that they think is funny, they feel embarrassed that they've shouted. They realise in the moment, "Oh, I shouldn't have shouted that out." And you don't necessarily want to humiliate them in front of everyone, so that they never shout out again. What I've been doing lately is just, because I'll do like 2 hour long tour shows with an interval in the middle, and I'll go on for the first hour, and if someone heckles during the first few minutes, I ignore them and don't even acknowledge it, and I carry on, and they'll often try it again and I ignore it. And then before the interval I just say, "We're going to have a break now. In case you haven't noticed, if you shout out, I'm just going to ignore you." And so you're just ruining it for the people around you who have paid to see the show. You're just ruining the show for people who have, got babysitters to come here, and you're shouting over the show that they're watching. So I'm not going to respond to you, and if you do it again, then you're probably going to get chugged out in the second half. But like, I think there are times where I'm doing a set that's a bit looser and someone shouts out and it's all good natured, and I try and be positive about what they've done instead, and just like, it's funny sometimes to agree with them and go like, "Yeah, you're right," or whatever. And like, at like, because if they're being mean, everyone in the room knows they're mean. You just got to like have a sense of humor about everything. But sometimes you're tired, you're really tired, you're on stage, someone shouts out, and you don't deal with it very well. So it's an ongoing thing for me, and I think definitely being able to ignore them is good, and being able to not take them seriously or let them get to you is good. And if you can develop those skills, then that's invaluable. If you can not care what the audience think and not care about hecklers, then that's probably the best. Because everyone's scared of them, and everyone's like, "Oh no, what happens if I get heckled?" And the heckler's going to look way worse than you do. So yeah, don't worry.
Thanks, James. Yeah, good lessons in resilience there about just not really caring about what other people think as well. I think is an important thing to learn as you grow older.
Yeah, massively.
We'll move on to a question from KBA, who have said, obviously, you've been involved in lots of television work. What has been your highlights? Obviously, it's really hard for you to have a favourite, but any highlights that you've got?
Taskmaster was a massive highlight. I really loved doing that. You get to do the whole series. It's such a funny show. I was really lucky. Everyone that I was on it with was great and funny. So I really loved doing Taskmaster, and I really loved doing the first 2 episodes of Would I Lie to You that I did. It's just a really fun show, and I had a really fun time on it. I got to speak about Kettering on it as well, which is cool. And yeah, those have been the most fun to do, I think. There's been other ones that have been really fun and I've really enjoyed, but those 2 really stand out as being, they're just 2 of the best shows on television. So in terms of comedy shows and comedy panel shows. So when you are lucky enough to be booked for one of those, and you're then lucky enough to have a good experience on it as well, because you know sometimes you can go on those shows and not really get a word in edgeways, and you kind of go, oh, that was a shame. I really wanted to do well on that show and no one really heard me say anything. But I was very lucky. I managed to have good experiences both times. And yeah, those 2 are still, in terms of TV stuff that gets brought up to me by the public, those are the 2 that get brought up the most.
Thanks, James. We'll go on to a question back from KSA, who so the students are Edward, Alan, Ollie and Harvey, who would like to know, have there been any major players in your rise to success? So I guess people that were supporting you.
Yeah, there's a comedian called Josie Long who I watched before I did stand-up. I was a big fan of her. She would do like gigs on her own that were to about, at the time, probably 50 to 100 people or whatever. When she came to Northamptonshire, it was closer to 50. And I was really into her stand-up, really loved her stand-up. And when I started doing comedy, she saw me a few times and liked me, and she was the person who kind of made comedy my job for me. She asked me if I would support her on tour, so I was able to quit my day job. I was a classroom assistant at a special needs school in Bermondsey in London, and I was able to quit that and support her on tour for the autumn. And then after that, Milton Jones asked me to go on tour with him as a support for a year. And those 2 experiences are what meant that I could make comedy my living. Like it was regular paid gigs, and a lot of experience in front of like different audiences, other people's audiences as well. Josie's audience were very, they liked experimental, like long form storytelling and weird, innovative comedy, and Milton's audiences like really short, really tight jokes and very mainstream. And so both of those experiences really taught me a lot, and Josie and Milton were both very generous with their time and listening to me thinking out loud, trying to solve my own material, and they were really supportive. So those 2 are the main people early on who kind of just gave me the time of day and gave me the opportunities to be able to improve and learn.
And do you find that usually happens in comedy, that as you're getting into it, you find other people who are going to be supportive of you and are going through the same experiences or have been from the same experiences?
Yeah, when you start doing the open mic circuit, you quickly form a group of friends, and you're all going through the same thing and you're all supporting each other. So for me, it was like Josh Widdicombe and Joel Dommett were like my 2 main friends on the comedy circuit when I started out, and we would always just every day very long conversations about comedy, about our material, how to fix certain routines together, and that was incredibly helpful straight away, to have people who are going through the same thing, who aren't competing with you. You're both trying to discover and learn and crack this puzzle together. And and also they were really hard workers, so it made me work hard. When you see your friends, Joel would do like 3 gigs a night in London, and Josh would be constantly writing new material all the time, and you wanted to keep up with them. You didn't want to get left behind, so it made you work harder as well. So like, while you don't have a boss over your shoulder saying get your work done, you are kind of like in a situation where you've got loads of like colleagues around you, and there's no boss, but everyone who's working hard, they're going to be the ones who go on and carry on with the job. So you do think, oh, I've got to work as hard as these guys.
Our next question is from Shay. They would like to know what football team you support, if you support a football team.
Nowadays, not so much. I guess I support the England team every international competition. And, you know, definitely growing up, I'd go and see Kettering games and supported Kettering Town FC, and still would now as well, still behind them. And I also supported Manchester United because I was a Glory supporter. And but the 1999 season when they won the treble was the peak for me, and after that I kind of lost interest. But I still to this day am kind of obsessed with that 1999 Manchester United team, and will watch those old games and watch those players who were in those teams be interviewed. And I've kind of gradually got back into modern day football a little bit, just because Gary Neville and Paul Scholes and Roy Keane are pundits now, and so I like to watch their punditry. So I kind of know what's going on a little bit in football because I like hearing Roy Keane talking about it.
And Isabella has said, when you came up with the Kettering FC remix, did you know it would be funny not only to Kettering folk but to people in other parts of the country too?
Great question. I didn't know. I didn't know in those days. I didn't know if anything was going to be funny until doing it on stage. I probably still don't know that now, but like, I definitely was in a point when I was writing that material and writing the show that it was a part of, where I knew what I found funny, and I knew that there was something about that song that I found funny anyway. I found the song quite funny. We would spell out Kettering Town FC as that, and then that was our football chant. Made me laugh anyway. And also, I kind of knew that being me and being very specific to me was funnier than trying to appeal to the room and how everybody is, and trying to be like, this is all of our experience. I knew it was funnier just to talk about my experience. And where I was from was a big thing that made me different on the comedy circuit, because a lot of comedians, when I was starting out, lived in London or Manchester, and lived in these big cities. And I was one of the ones who was an outsider from a small town, and so I really wanted to draw on that and to make that a part of who I was on stage, and not try and pretend like I was one of them. And so I kind of knew that that would, at least that element of it, would be effective.
Yeah, again, I think a great thing for the students to just know that it's important to be proud of where you're from, no matter what you do in the future. Really important to be proud of where you're from.
Yeah, and part of being proud of where you're from as well is being disappointed with it when it lets you down and stuff like that. So there is, like, you know, being proud of where you're from isn't just blindly backing it all the time. It's also saying, like, okay, England as a whole isn't being great at the minute, UK isn't, Kettering isn't, you know, part of caring about something is wanting it to be better. So I'm so proud of where I'm from, but also, you know, have a history of calling it out whenever it's not acting proud of itself.
Our next question is from Quinn, who would like to know, out of all the albums you love from 2016, what is your favourite hip-hop album from the year?
Telephone by No Name, who is a Chicago rapper, and she made this album that's really summery, but with really serious lyrics in it about a lot of socio-political things. I think the production on it's brilliant. I think her rapping style is amazing. It's a classic album. So that and Danny Brown's Atrocity Exhibition are my two favourite hip-hop albums from 2016. I think they're both classics. If you haven't heard them, get into them. Go and listen to them.
Thanks, James. Go get into them. And before we go today, do you have any closing comments that you'd like to say to the students listening?
Just thank you for joining us. I think that's really cool that you've all given questions and you've all joined us on here. And I really look forward to doing the workshop with the people who do the workshop. And yeah, like, you're all great. And I'm sorry that the last couple of years have been really hard with schools and education and stuff like that. And well done for not giving up and keeping on going. And that will, again, that'll probably make you good comedians if you wanted to do it. resilient.
James, thank you so much for joining us today to talk about your experience as a comedian, how you got into it, and also letting the students know about the upcoming comedy workshops. It's been great to have you.
Thank you. Have a good day.